I'm Jim Collison, live from the Gallup studios here in Omaha, Nebraska, as well as our office in Sydney, Australia. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on June 5th, 2018. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions during this live webcast, we do have a chat room that's available for you right below the main video window down there on the page. Love to have you log in. The login button, bottom left-hand corner on the chat room. Choose the guest account, take the guest name out, put your name in so we know who you are, and then you can ask us your questions live during the program. If you do have questions after the webcast, or you're catching the recorded version of it, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, or use the contact form right there on the live page. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. Just GallupStrengthsCenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video and downloadable audio, both offline and online, available for you. We call that podcasting. Available on all the podcast apps. Pretty easy to find by searching Called to Coach. Or you can go to our resources page at the coach's blog. Just head over to coaching.gallup.com. Ann Lingenfelter is our host today. She works as a learning solutions consultant with Gallup out of our Sydney, Australia office. And I'm super glad that you're here tonight because I'm not going to have a voice in like 1 minute. So welcome to another Call to Coach.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Over to us, and that's absolutely fine. You can just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show for a change. There you go. My guest tonight is Zac Lohrisch, and Zac works at The Good Guys, which is one of the Australia's largest and most respected retailers. He says that he is on a mission to help people live their best life. As the learning content manager at The Good Guys, he is building strong individuals and teams with an innovative approach to leadership development. He's implemented strengths in a national leadership development program that's been delivered to more than 300 retail leaders. And he says that his passion is developing impactful learning solutions that get desired results. Zac's top 5 are learner, individualization, ideation, woo, and communication. Zac, welcome to Called Coach.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We're keen to hear the story. I was just in the pre-show, we were chatting a bit, and you let me know that you've worked for The Good Guys for 10 years. And across that 10 years, you've had multiple roles in HR, and was it learning and development as well? Or org development? Yeah, learning and development. So that's fantastic. Is that where you found out about strengths? Were you introduced to strengths whilst you were in that journey at Good Guys?
Yeah, absolutely. And in about 2011, when I was working in one of my early corporate roles as a relative junior, I guess, I was introduced to the concept of strengths through a team building day, which we held in our retail operations team. And from there, that's what really sparked it for me. So yes, definitely been around strengths a long time. However, I don't think really, getting deep into it until I did the coaching certification with you guys in Sydney, and met several years later, and then sort of in a team now looking after learning content, we're able to sort of inject strengths into a lot of what we do day to day, which is really exciting.
Yeah, fantastic. We're looking forward to you bringing that to life for our guests tonight and telling us exactly how you do that. But before you get going, let's set the stage a little bit. For those who are not familiar with The Good Guys, can you talk a bit about the size of the business? How many employees you're working with? And are they in lots of different remote locations, or just to paint that picture for us a bit?
Yeah, so The Good Guys is a national retailer in Australia. We have over 100 stores and about 4,000 team members across the country. So comparatively speaking, in Australian terms, we're a relatively large organization, and geographically spread across the entire country in regional and metropolitan locations. So it's definitely one of those experiences where you got people all over the place, and developing solutions to meet everyone's needs can be really challenging. But yeah, that's sort of the context of the organization. We have a long history. We've been around since the 60s, so sort of 50s and 60s. So, and lots changed since then, I guess. But yeah, that's sort of the background of our organization. And we primarily in the retail space, e-commerce, and we sell help customers find solutions for home electronic products.
Okay. So in the work that you're doing on the learning and development side, I know you mentioned that you use strengths in a leadership development program. Are you talking about top leaders? Are you dealing with frontline and middle management as well? The programs that you're doing and that you're going to speak about today, where in the organization are you sort of plugging those in?
Yeah, so I guess where it started for us was we were looking at that senior level of retail leadership. And I think when you think about the context of the retail talent out in Australia, and I'm guessing in many other parts of the world, leadership is a skill that's really hard to find and really hard to develop in retail. And to get that really great executive leaders in the field was a challenge that we were working on at the time. And so part of it was, we really felt like Strengths had a lot to offer for someone in the leadership space. And we can talk more about that today. I think there's a big role for Strengths in a leadership sense. And so we sort of started looking at that senior level of leadership in the stores. And then since then, we've been able to, been really supported to develop that program out and hit all middle management as well. And so now it's not just the leader with a philosophy of strengths. Now we've got their managers who support them in running our stores, also with a philosophy of strengths in their training as well.
Okay, fantastic. Obviously, I think when we think about the challenges or the unique challenges that retail faces, turnover is the first one that would come to my mind. A lot of short-term or casual people. What are some of the other unique challenges that folks in retail deal with?
Yeah, I think, and especially if it pertains to the learning and development context, retail is not traditionally a tremendously academic place. It's a place, and if we can start to profile the kind of talent that lives in retail, think about our executors, those people that just love to get their hands dirty, and those relationship builders, those people that just love to be in front of customers, love to be in front of people. Those are the kinds of people which live in and thrive in retail. And so the challenges, I guess, that presents us is that we've got people that are really keen to get stuff done, but it can be hard to help them pause and stop and reflect, and all of those qualities that are required for someone to feel a change in behavior or to reflect on where they're going and their development. So I think learning and development is a challenge in retail generally, because we've got this fast-paced, executing type employee who just loves to get stuff done and loves to make customers happy, but it can be really hard for them to pause on that point of self-reflection. And so that's a unique one, I guess, from the learning and development perspective.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that. I think when we were chatting yesterday in preparation for this, there were a couple of things that I appreciated in what you were talking about that really showed me that you have a different approach perhaps than some folks. And I'd love if you could give a bit of a summary just as to, if you were to talk about your approach and what do you think is different or unique about the way you approach strengths and apply it in the L&D context at The Good Guys?
Yeah. I think for us, and I think it starts from experience in probably having made every possible mistake there is in learning and development. And, if I could briefly touch on those, because I think those were the source of the greatest learning from my personal experience. But, a lot of the time in my early learning and development years, I'd be thinking about, I'm really passionate to get this strengths thing going, and I really want to, help everyone discover their strengths and find a more meaningful life. And I really identify with that as my purpose. The challenge with that is that strengths, really can't be its own thing. And when you try and say, hey, you got to do, all this stuff as a part of your job. And if you think about a retail leader, they're really busy people, they're, dealing with helping customers, they're helping resolve issues, they're helping team members, and they've got web sales that are being picked up and stock coming in, stock needs to go out. And then I'm going to come up to them and say, hey, and I want you to do this strengths thing as well. It's too much. And I think that was probably the source of my greatest learning, and any resistance that I got early in my learning career was around, really, how do I do this extra thing called strengths? And so I think where it sort of started for me was when we were challenged to integrate it into some of the things we're already doing. And so if we're going to teach, what quality leadership is about, and we're going to talk around, how to develop great communication skills and do really good one-on-ones and those sorts of tasks that are meaningful to a leader, how does strengths work in those contexts rather than making strengths its own thing? And so, although I would not say that we are, we're a strengths-based organization, or we do this, are we best practice or anything, I probably wouldn't say that. I think we're on a journey. I think where our programs work really well is that they're anchored in the context of the job already. And so you would never come to a strength session with me or the team. We would be doing a session on something else that would be much more business outcome oriented. You'd be learning about leadership in the context of emotional intelligence and communication and business storytelling. And we'd be talking about how your strengths help you do that stuff really well. And so the question that comes back in my mind, what are we already doing, and how can we help them do that even better through strengths? And I think that's just the mindset that helps us set up for this really different, strengths experience than what I've experienced in other organizations and out there.
Yeah, that's excellent. Absolutely spot on. And I think it takes people in the strengths journey sometimes a long time to get there, because they get so hung up in the naming stage and even in the claiming stage at times that they never really get it into. That's what aiming is. Exactly what you just described is bringing it into the context of the rest of the business. So I love that you've started the show off with that, because we could just stay there all for the whole rest of the time and talk about that in different ways that you've done that. And that's the most power. That's when strengths becomes powerful. So when you had that realization, what did you do differently? And I mean, and it's twofold. What did you, as your job of L&D, do differently? And how did you communicate differently within the people within your organization so that they would come on board and really believe you that it wasn't going to be another thing?
Yeah, I think the first part is having leadership support. And that's something that, I've been really blessed with over the last few years with the good guys is, we have leaders that have really challenged our learning team to think differently about strengths and about the programs that we run. And I guess with that mindset of, how can strengths help us do the stuff we need to do better, more effectively, more efficiently, whatever that might be, they started to challenge us to think about the feeling of strengths. And I guess that's probably where we started, how does it feel to be in the strength zone, and how do I know if I'm there, and then what steps do I need to take to get there? That was sort of, I guess, where our leaders challenged us to go, because we're already doing a lot of stuff, and we're already, we're all trying to do the same thing, all trying to get the same result. And instead of making it about, a selfish facilitator might make it about the program that they would like to roll out and the program they would like to be famous for, we tried to think in a very much a design thinking, user experience mindset that was around the learner and, what things do they really want to get and achieve in their career? What do they need to do day to day? And we started to think about how do we just start to pepper strengths in across these different concepts. And so it's almost for us, was a really covert way of introducing strengths concepts into the organization. And, I'd tried overtly, let's run a strength session and let's, get a PowerPoint, let's get leaders in the room, let's get buy-in and get a program and, a budget to roll this out, that whole roll this out kind of mentality. And it never really got off the ground. And so what we found is, okay, maybe if we're not going to get that off the ground, maybe we could just do it more subtly and start to inject little bits here and there along the way. And that might be more effective. And I guess that's definitely been our experience.
So can you tell me, you mentioned having the strengths language in a leadership development thing. So you're talking about, the context and the business storytelling and all of that and bringing the language in. But can you give a few more examples of where you sort of covertly brought strengths in without talking about it as strengths? And second question, for the parking lot is, do you use the word strengths? Do you call it strengths? Do you actively avoid that?
I want to answer that one first because I think it's an easy one. We don't actively avoid it. I think we definitely use the word strength. The word strength carries such an emotive response that I think it's a powerful mindset to have. But to avoid all other emotional reactions is also a bit of a caution. So we try and elicit a lot of other emotions. In way, as your other question or your original question, in how we've covertly introduced it, when we're asked to look at a program, let's say, for example, it's, one-on-ones or customer service or your performance review programs. There are ways in which, when you redesign them, that you can make them inherently strengths-based without having to roll out a big strengths deal about it. You know, a simple solution might be, for example, if we're going to teach someone to have and facilitate a really great one-on-one between manager and team member, we would teach them potentially to start with strengths before they talk around, you know, business opportunities. Not because we're trying to create a bit of a feedback sandwich and avoid the feedback that might need to be delivered. But what's really powerful about that is we're able to help someone realize the source of their greatest potential and look at the business gap from a place of strength, rather than look at a weakness or a business gap that the individual needs to develop in, and then have them just, you know, figure out a solution for it, which is definitely, you know, in my mind would be the definition of a weakness fixing approach. So we'd like to maybe start them with hey, what are the things that you're doing really well? And how do you now, you know, use that experience and that knowledge or that mindset to help you in the things that you're gapping in? And I think that's just a short example about how that. Another example, you know, we're asked to, you know, do some other training programs around, you know, sales or other things, and we just try and inherently make them strengths-based. We ask people to reflect on, you know, what works really well for them. What is it about their mindset that customers really like? You know, especially when it comes down to that really tangible frontline team member. You know, what is it about, you know, their approach that customers really like? And we really try and encourage them to find their own voice and find their authenticity when they're standing in front of a customer. Because that, again, allows them to be in a strengths-based mindset before they go and attack the problem that might be, you know, sales or whatever they're trying to achieve. They're looking at it from a position of strength. What is my style? What is the way I do this really well? And how do I go do more of that and less of scripting or whatever that might look? You know, in other organizations that, you know, that I've been involved with and that I've had experiences with in the past, you might see them want to script employees or give them specific things that they might need to do. And I guess for us, we try and land what is the feeling or the result or the outcome, and then how are you going to use your talents, or how are you going to authentically go about achieving them? And I think, again, the strengths philosophy is inbuilt into the process without it being an assessment or a you know, a strengths teach out. It's about the strengths philosophy, and that is that someone can go about getting the result their own way, and we give them agency over that result and that the way they get there.
Okay, excellent. That's excellent. So tell me a little bit about when you say that, you know, you've mentioned the word feeling several times. You know, you talk to people about, you know, how is this feeling, and so who's having that conversation? Is it the manager having it with their individual contributor? Is it yourself? I mean, who has that level of conversation?
I guess when I talk about feeling, I definitely think there's a lot about the programs that we run. I think we always want to start with feeling. And so if I could sequence, you know, if I could, you know, help any L&D professional sequence learning well, especially when it comes to strengths, we want to get them to feel strengths first before we start going down the route of, you know, assessments and naming and then trying to figure out how to apply it. I think there's a couple of things that happens when you start with feeling. Part of it is, why should I even buy into this? We could give someone all the data in the world. You know, we could say, hey, this is going to increase your productivity and increase engagement and increase your profitability and all those things that, you know, with Gallup data that we know to be true. We could definitely go and tell them all those things. But I don't think that helps someone feel bought into the process, or wants to, because we're asking someone here to sort of abandon a lifetime of conditioning about what good leadership is about. And that lifetime of conditioning says that in order to be successful, you've got to focus on those things you're terrible at, those weaknesses, those things that make you feel drained and exhausted, and you've got to find a way to just be better at them. And so we've got to help them abandon this big part of their life very quickly if we're going to be successful with strengths. So the only way to do that, in my experience, is to start with feeling. And, you know, if I give a couple of examples about how you might go about that, you know, I have my favorite of all activities that we'd ever run in any, no matter what senior level a team member might be in, whether they're the store executive level or somewhere in middle management or frontline team member, I think it is equally applies across all roles, is I have teams build a bridge. And you might have used this activity in team building, but the debrief is really powerful when it comes to strength. And I have them build a bridge, except what we do with that exercise is we sort of put a river out and we give them some, you know, some paper and newspaper or whatever it might be. It's actually not important what you give them because creativity takes away and they'll find a way to build it. And we ask the teams on either side of the river to build a bridge that joins across in the middle. And we give them some planning time and we give them some building time and some assembly time and some reflection time. And what you see when we build, oh, and by the way, I should mention that we make it really challenging because we change stuff on them a lot. It's kind of the joy of being a facilitator. You get to sort of, you know, play a little bit.
Move the goalposts.
Yeah. And again, this is the retail, and I guess to an extent, this is every business in the world right now. Disruption is everywhere. And the goalposts are changing all the time. And so to give someone a task and let them finish it without any kind of vitiating factors would be, we wouldn't be doing our job, would we? We'd be remiss if we didn't do that. So for example, you know, we asked them to build a bridge that traverses the river bank to bank. But then at the end of planning time, we actually say they need to roll a tennis ball over it. And so their specs of this bridge might have been very aesthetic, but not load bearing. And so now they need to reconsider. About halfway through the activity, we then give them a cue ball from a pool table, and that's quite a bit heavier. And so then again, does their structural integrity, is that going to hold up? And you know, the other part of it is we ask them to build their bridges off site. And you know, what tends to happen is executors run off in one direction, the other executors run off in the other direction, and no one made a plan to come back and communicate at the river. And so then they find a part where they need to go, oh, in order to get this bridge to join, I'm going to need to talk to the other team, but they're offside on the other side of the river and, you know, I can't get to them. And so the debrief becomes especially powerful because we get to the end of this activity that takes sort of 30 or 40 minutes and we're able to debrief behaviors. And, you know, I can talk through some of the things we've seen since we've been running this style of program. You know, we've had people that just, you know, in the planning time, no matter what, they just can't help but get their hands in the basket, even though it's against the rules. And that tells us something about the kind of talents that they have and the kind of way that they see the world. And I know it's wrong in the context of the activity, but it tells us something about their strength and how it's best applied, that they just can't wait to get their hands on and get started with something. You know, these might be the real, you know, real doers, right? But some people really love the planning time. They love getting the pen and paper and sort of sketching it and thinking about it and discussing it and conceptualizing it in their minds. And so they really thrive in that environment. Then we call time on and they're allowed to go build. And those people might now take a back seat and the people with their hands on the sticky tape and the paper and they're all trying to build things. And I think, you know, the other realizations that tend to come from that is, you know, if you've got too many doers, you know, what happens when we have a whole bunch of executors trying to do their thing, you know, maybe not from the balcony, maybe a little from the basement sometimes as well. It's chaos, you know, you've got sticky tape flying everywhere, resources are being wasted, and, you know, these sorts of reflections start to come out. And as we come to assembly time, we're now bringing two teams back together who had some time at the start, probably didn't talk a lot in the middle if they didn't plan it, because most of them don't. And now they're trying to build things that were supposed to be the same, but they end up looking totally different. And so they now have to retrofit them so that they can join across the river and complete the task. And then you get this sort of other sort of social, you know, interaction where, you know, there's either people that are uber accommodating, like really accommodating and really welcoming and want all ideas and want people to, you know, connect on it. There are other people that just want the task done. And so at the end of this activity, it's the very start of the day. We haven't said anything about strengths. We haven't said anything about the assessment they took. We haven't talked about any of the themes yet, but everyone is starting, and the debrief starts to see the behaviors that are coming out in a really simulated environment, which is very similar to what they would do every day at work. Goalposts changing, deadlines are tight, timelines are changing, communication is hard, tons of personalities that we have to manage, and how do we get the most out of each other and this experience of coming to work? And I think strengths really allows us to do that. And in that sort of example is sort of how we would, start to teach strengths.
Look, that's excellent. I love that you are talking about the strengths-based philosophy before you even introduce the assessment. And I think that you're the only coach that I've ever talked to who's actually done that, who's actually prepared the audience within your organization about a strengths-based approach and done work with it and had them experience it on some level before naming it. And I think that that's really smart, because it probably informs best application for it, what you can do with it. And it changes the focus from the assessment to the philosophy of strengths. And I think that's also a really important, sort of nuance, because there's too many people who get hung up in the language and they don't lead with positive intent with it, or they'll label people with it, or what have you, or they'll think it's, means they don't have to do something else. And when you're focusing more on the whole philosophy of a strengths-based approach and outcomes, and lesser on the assessment and the language, I think you must have better success with it and more traction. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a massive believer in thinking about mindset, and just personally, my personal mission around helping people live a better life and maximize their own potential I think it all comes back to your mindset. And I think the question I ask is, how can we embed a strengths-based mindset in people? Because if they've got a mindset, they actually don't need an assessment necessarily, and they actually don't need all of those things, and they'd be better off in their day-to-day. But where the assessment starts to help now is we can move them into giving them a language to talk about strengths, and they can start to articulate those things they do really well. And so I think, by kind of flipping it, instead of, introducing strengths and an assessment and then doing, some kind of experience around it, if we start with the feeling and start with the experience, it actually makes the assessment much more meaningful. And there's a challenge that I struggled with for years when I was trying to implement strengths in teams and trying to add value in an organization. When you want to come in and just say, hey, well, let's do this strengths thing, it was just really slow going, while people go, and what does that mean? And what does that word mean? And really, significance, that sounds like a real person. I wouldn't want to be around that person. So they get really hung up on the definitions instead of what it feels like to be in the strength zone. And so to sequence it again, we sort of talk about that experience, and we have people reflect on, the times when they were at their best and the times when they were in their strength zone. And we use the assessment to help them give a language to that strength statement. So rather than, introduce it and say, these are your strengths, we actually ask them to reflect on the times they felt strong, and then use the assessment to help them articulate it. And again, in an organizational context where, retail is not overly academic, it is practical and real and honest. We don't need to get too deep into the assessment necessarily. It just helps people give a language that they might not have had before.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've been in workshops before where folks were talking about the strengths-based approach, but they said, actually, you don't need a language. And it was interesting because by the end of it, I definitely felt that was false because what I found were the people in the room were so frustrated because they were trying to create their own language, and that took so much time. And so actually, in order to get things done and move on, we do need to have that common language that we can apply. But I love that you're doing that, as you say, when you're in your sequencing, that comes after they've really started to understand and claim the strengths-based philosophy. So I think that's excellent. So in your sequencing, how do you know that this is all working?
Yeah. And I guess I'm going to call it off from the bat. And I think there's probably a lot more, we could do with measurement. But I guess some of the things that I'm looking for is, I got an individualization talent. And so broad stroked metrics are not always going to appeal to me personally. So I try and apply or be aware that, my strengths lens is about, how do I make sure that this session or this intervention that we've designed is valuable for each individual in the room, and how do I let it sort of impact them all in its own unique way. But I'm especially looking for reflections. And so we ask, I often ask team members to reflect and make sure they publicly announce that, and whether that be via a selfie video or by just, standing up in front of the room and calling it what they're going to own or what they've really taken it. And by the quality of that response, you can definitely tell to what extent you've been impactful. I think that's a very qualitative metric, though. So it's a very, I guess that's tangible feedback for me as a facilitator to know if the intervention we've just ran has been successful right then and there. How do we know that it's implemented down the track, especially, in a large organization like ours where strengths is not embedded across all of our systems and processes? So, how do I know that that philosophy is carried through? I think part of any intervention is coaching, and we quickly realized that if we didn't follow up the intervention with some coaching afterwards, then we wouldn't be successful in the programs we're trying to run. And if we're trying to, one of our big initiatives is to develop leadership capability, so if we're going to develop that over a period of time, we really need to check in and make sure. And so, one of the things we've been working on more recently is, a feedback loop or a coaching loop that happens fortnightly for many weeks after any face-to-face intervention. The other things we look at from a quantitative metric point of view, we're thinking about, to what extent, of all the people that have come through our program, and it's there's been a few over the last few years, how many of those people have been promoted, transitioned in role, have moved on and taken on greater responsibility. And, although I can't speak to the specific number, the results are pretty incredible. When you start to tally up the impact you've had over several years of doing it now, we've been doing a version of this program for 2 or 3 years. You can start to see that people are now transitioning through this organization like I haven't seen it before, which is a great metric for success. I think the other one for us is we always take a ton of feedback. So I guess no session that we would run would ever be the same as the last one. And we have a method of making sure we obtain really good quality feedback, and then we try and implement something different every single time and make sure that we're always striving for something a little bit better. But in that feedback, we're able to measure what you might measure if you're in marketing. You might measure a net promoter score, which allows you to understand those people who would recommend your product or service and those people who would detract or not recommend it. And you can derive some kind of metric from that. We would do something similar, but for a learning initiative. To what extent are people going to, evangelize the program that we've run? And one of our initial concepts was, how do we create a bit of a tribe mentality around the programs we run, especially when it comes to leadership. We want to have this club of leaders who are exceptionally good and gifted, and we've got to help them get there. And how we create that sort of really tight community on leadership. And so we measure sort of the feedback from our employees in a different way, I guess, than what we would have in the past. If you've ever been to any professional development seminar, you've probably signed off one of those happy sheets before, one of the ones that tells you, hey, did your facilitator do good? Yeah, of course they did. Excellent, 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 excellent. I'm going to go have lunch now. So I try and avoid the happy sheet. We call them happy sheets in jest. I mean, they have their purpose, but I guess there's a lot more you could do with feedback. So instead of giving someone feedback to do before they leave for the day, we might get them to do it at the start of the next day. Yes, there's a bit of separation, but I guess what that means is they're in a fresh mindset. They're able to reflect on, over several days of a program, what was the most impactful thing from yesterday, and what would I have them do differently, and would I recommend that part of the course to someone else? And that helps us understand where we as a team can really improve. And as I said, I don't think any program we've run has been exactly like the last one. We're always tweaking something to make sure it meets the needs of the learner that's coming.
So 2 things. One is when they leave the program and the coaching that happens after that, who does the coaching?
Yeah, so we facilitate that in our team, in our learning and development team. I guess part of it is you have to find what scales for you, and with groups of 30, it's achievable. I guess if it became any bigger than that, we would have to reconsider our approach. And I guess you've got to find what's scalable for you. But we're very blessed to have a few great coaches in our team, and that are really passionate about, implementing not only strengths, but just the quality of leadership generally, and how strengths plays into that as a part of it, of course.
Do managers across the business have conversations, performance, development conversations, or any conversations with their individual contributors using strengths? I mean, is it part of that structure that of conversations that they have?
Yeah, I've had great engagement from a lot of our field leaders out there who want to start, and I think their gut tells them, or their go-to is to start getting assessments done. But it allows us to have a conversation. We go, hey, before you get an assessment done, what could you do today that would help you instill a strengths-based mindset in your team? And so that allows us to have those conversations with them and set them up for that better, and although, I'd love to roll out, strengths to every individual in the organization, those things are slow, and in a large organization with many competing priorities, that's hard to do. But what can we do today? The questions I always put back to the leaders that really want to take this is, what does the strengths-based mindset mean to you? And what would you be doing differently if you had the strengths code, in your team right now than what you're doing today? And often the answer that comes back from leaders that really want to implement this is, I'd be, maybe reconsidering how I allocate tasks, and I'd be maybe reconsidering how I, where in the store they maybe work, or primarily, or, how I prioritize their hours, or whatever that might be. Okay, and so we just have that conversation around, how would you do that? How could you do that now anyway? What kind of conversation could you have with someone that would help you do that now without a code just yet? And my vision would be like, I would love for everyone in the world to be able to have the strengths code, placed on their desk and have an opportunity to have that. But I guess that's that's a long-term vision, I guess. But yeah, there's a lot of leaders. We definitely have a process where team members and leaders meet and they're coached regularly. To what extent the leader really wants to make that authentically strengths-based is probably a matter of personal buy-in, and we support them to what extent they'd like to implement that.
Would you say that if we had all 4,000 people in a room, what percentage of those employees would know what strengths is? And would they say that it's seen in an aspirational way, so that if people haven't taken the assessment yet, they would like to be able to at some point? How's it seen by the general population, would you say?
I think generally there's a tremendous appetite for the strengths philosophy, or the strengths code, and the strengths assessment, and people really want that because I think it offers them something different that they haven't had in their lives before, and it's very intriguing for them, and I think there's a tremendous appetite out there for it. To what extent they recognize the strengths language, I said, what is CliftonStrengths? I'm not sure that they would, necessarily recall, CliftonStrengths. If I was to ask them what makes, your one-on-ones really valuable, I think they would definitely call out the behaviors that underpin strengths. And that is, leading with talent, leading with positive intent, being aware of balcony and basement, and always trying to spend as much time as we can in the balcony, trying to spend as much time as we can in our strengths, the areas of things we do really well, and trying to find systems and processes that allow us to spend as little time in areas of weakness as possible. If those are some of the philosophies, I think they would definitely identify with those as being the keys that make a great work environment.
Yeah, no, that's excellent, because I think what happens when you're in a large work environment like yours, where you have, 4,000 employees, and you're trying to have, strengths in there, it's tricky because, we know from experience that flipping the switch and making everybody strengths focused or strengths based overnight is not the way to go. It's not successful. It's not positive. But in the same token, when you're trying to roll it out, sometimes it can lead to an us versus them, environment where people are saying, how come they've gotten to take the assessment and we haven't gotten to, from department to department? So have you had any issues like that where people have gotten a little grouchy because they've wanted to have it and you've had to figure out how you could manage their engagement levels before, it was time for you guys to actually work in that space?
Yeah, I think that's been a place where we've been for a little while. I think we do strengths very well in leadership and in learning. I think where, maybe there's an opportunity, and maybe in other organizations as well, is to start building it more overtly into systems and processes, and to what extent that would, help the business achieve results is I think one that would be a great case study. We've developed a program for leadership that is really desirable. And so we've got people that really want to come on this program and really want to be a part of the leadership training that we've developed. And so it has been a little bit of a case of managing priorities, but we have great support from our leadership out in the field, so our territory leadership and our leadership in retail operations, to prioritize the right people. And we've been given great support, obviously, to reach out to as many people as we possibly can. So I feel like we've really hit the leadership level really well.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I'd be interested when you talk about, linking strengths to the business outcomes into what you're already doing in a granular way. What does that process look like? I mean, is it like you have 5 goals for the financial year that the management wants you guys to hit, and so you literally go in and sit down with them and you say, right, these are the goals that you have. Goal number 1, let's think about how we can implement strengths into the approach that you're taking to achieve that goal. Is that how it works? Does the management come to you and say, hey, Zac, we need you to come brainstorm with us about, how we link this to the business outcomes? Can you talk a little bit about how that process unfolds so that folks who are in L&D and other roles can understand, how it's working for you?
Yeah. I guess maybe a really specific example that could help is, we wanted to make sure that all our employees were set up for success in their day-to-day. And so we were implementing a one-on-one process where, every month you get a coaching conversation with your leader. Now, it's really easy, I guess, and a lot of organizations have implemented something like this or have something like this already that they'd probably like to improve. And that is this idea of performance review and this general trend of moving away from maybe the yearly, biannually performance review to something more frequent. I think where we really play in the L&D space or in organizational development is how that's done. Because the process is simple. You're going to sit down, you're going to spend 15 minutes, you're going to talk about someone and where they can grow and their development so that they can achieve better results for your store or your organization. That concept, I think, and that process is really easy to implement. You could, create a form or something digital and record the conversation and all that. But it all comes back. I mean, the results that you get from that all come back to how good that conversation was. And so when we, support the business to roll out initiatives, that's where I think we can add the most value from a strengths perspective. We can think about what is the best way to facilitate this coaching conversation, and how do you deliver feedback with high regard that helps someone close a gap or an opportunity from a place of strength. And I guess that's, an example about where we've played recently in the coaching space, where we wanted all of our middle management and leaders to be have that coaching skill set. And so we've done a lot in, how do you be a good coach? And I guess strengths is a great place to start. If you think back, and those people have been through our leadership program, so they've had the strengths philosophy already sort of they've already been exposed to that philosophy and they're already bought into it. So now then we come with a business challenge with them. We say, hey, we're going to do this coaching thing, and we'd like to do some training with you around how we, coach our employees. We get them to then go back and go, hey, so think about those strengths that you talked about when you were at our leadership program. How do you, with your top 5, facilitate great conversations with your employees? How are you going to lead with? And there's some great examples of leaders that have made massive breakthroughs in the way that they engage their employees. And I think the biggest one is that comes up all the time for us in this particular program was, I need to ask my team member more questions, and I need to ask them about what it feels like when they're doing that task. If it's sales they're trying to drive, how did that feel for them? Was that the right style? What would be more authentic for the team member? And so I think, that skill of, we talk in the strengths world about being a good strengths spotter, or being able to, identify strengths in others, those people around us. I think a big realization that's come out of that program for leaders has been, how do I become a good strengths spotter and see the strengths that are coming through and out in my employees and help them really develop and hone in on those things. For example, if it comes to selling, and I think, the strengths-based selling philosophy is one that I love, because it's not about, Zac, go and copy John because John does this sales thing really well. That might not be necessarily authentic to Zac, and the way I deliver that could be very different to the way that John delivers it. So the coaching conversation comes back to, hey, how could you do it? What words work for you, and what comes naturally to you? How would you start that conversation? And I think if that's the how part of the coaching, and that feeds into the process of, now we can document it and agree on a goal and agree on a way forward, and then give feedback and measure it. The how, that middle bit, is where I think strengths can be really valuable, and where we've played a lot with coaching and helping leaders use their strengths and apply them to a business task. And so it wasn't a strength session at all. If anyone went to that session and they're listening right now, they probably go, oh, I didn't think I was at a strength session. And the answer is because you weren't. You were at a session about a really big business need. And we find ways to knit strengths in, because comes back to my question, if there's a way that strengths can add value to the business through this process, then we'll try and put it in there.
Yep. Yeah. Excellent. Jim, do you have any questions or anything in the chat room coming through?
It's been good to listen. Zac, I really appreciated one of the things that you kind of focus on is finding the value in the person, right? In finding whether you have the tool or you don't. And it's kind of hard once you've been through the tool. It's hard not to see it in people. And so even as your managers start working with individuals, even if they don't have the top 5 in front of them, they probably begin to naturally start finding those performance metrics in them that help them be more productive. And we know oftentimes that's putting them in places where they can be successful, right? And so that begins to influence that. But I really like it was loud and clear to me that it's finding the value in that person. Like, what are you really good at? And you can do that. Strength spotting, we do that in our child development center here at Gallup. And I think managers who don't have access to that top 5 can do that very, very quickly by being able to ask those really strong performance questions. Yeah. What do you do and what do you do well?
Yeah. And Jim, there's a great story I heard not so long ago. I was in a coaching call with a leader out there, and he'd moved someone from our warehousing space. And this is the person that would help us manage our stock and, move stock throughout the store and maybe help customers load stock into their cars, that kind of thing. And he was able to spot some things. And the sorts of things he told me he was noticing is that, he was really inefficient because he'd spend tons of time talking to the customer at the back dock. And it was like, and then he was, he was getting things done, but he'd find himself talking to the team members. Now, and I think it's really easy for us as retail leaders when something's getting in the way of performance, when it's like, oh, that person just can't stop talking to people. That's just not conducive to the result that they're set up to deliver. And the simple transition was kind of easy with the strengths mindset is, hey, this person's really good at talking to people. If I can show them a bit about the products we sell, they could probably sell a lot of stuff. And I've heard a few of the similar stories to that. And, just moving someone out of the space where maybe they were competent and maybe not performing badly, but I don't think they were outstanding. And trying to put them in a position where they can be remarkable. Those are the sort of stories which give me a lot of energy. And I think that's, again, comes back to the purpose of why we're all here talking about this stuff, is because we can help someone get, understand a little bit more about what they're capable of, and help us find a little bit more for this organization that we're passionate about. And I mean, those are the things that light me up as a facilitator when you hear those stories.
Yeah, it's a great story. We have a brand new crop of interns in for the summer here, and one of my leads in one of my area, she has competition and focus in her top 5, and some other ones that would lead you to believe she's all about getting things done and does it, maybe not a good people person. And yet everything we've seen so far is she is all about people and is going to be a dynamite leader in this area. And maybe if I would have taken that top 5 for face value, I would have missed some opportunities and seeing her actually responding with people in the way she works. And so, and I think you said this early, is sometimes we start pigeonholing people in kind of based on an assumption of who they are. Zach, I think you said that as well. We get tripped up and we sometimes let that get in our way. Now, having it is incredibly helpful. Like, I'm seeing some great things in her, but I think we have to do both, right? We have to understand who the person is and find the value that they bring, and then bring that framework into the way to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And not let one get in the way of the other.
There's a great story I'd love to share about exactly that point. I mean, I had a young lady through one of our programs that we ran in leadership. And after we did the strengths day, and, because we obviously get them to do the assessment, but we don't, talk about it for quite some time until we, it's right in the experience design, it's the right place to talk about it. And, what she said it sticks with me because I think it really means something when she said to me that, hey, I thought my strengths were really weaknesses, and she had, if you can imagine, this is a leader of a store. She has a team reporting to her, and she's got, empathy and, restorative and these sorts of talents. And when people often look at those talents, and especially when they get them on their own report, they're looking down at that and they're going, oh my God, these aren't leadership talents. This is not what a manager is supposed to be about. But what she said to me at the end of the session, she said, I thought these were my greatest weaknesses, but now I can see that they're my biggest strengths. And that's not me paraphrasing. That was literally word for word that comes from out of her mouth. And that just sort of highlights that the impact you can have on someone when you get that right, that sequencing right, and help someone understand their own value. And now her mindset when she goes and leads a team now is going to be the same. Maybe those things that perceivably are a weakness, those things that might be perceived to be getting in the way or not a leadership talent or not conducive to our result, maybe they can be applied in a really productive way. And I've just got to figure out how.
Yeah. No, I think well said. And before I lose my voice, let's wrap this.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, thanks so much, Zach, for being here with us today. I think you've given us some great information and tools to work with. Is there anything that you wish I would have asked that I didn't ask, or anything important to say before we close?
Look, I've only got stories to share, but I guess for me, I just think I always want to come back with any of these things, these discussions that we have in our strengths community groups or our organizations is why we do strengths. And for me, it's definitely about the business outcome, and I'm very passionate about making sure we achieve business results. I think, but it's also about the individual that we're impacting at the end of the day. And I think there is so much value that we can add to people's lives by doing this really well. We don't want it to be a little, just a little, flash in the pan. Is that an expression that translates? A short-term thing that just sort of someone gets a little bit of a spark of energy out and then sort of puts in the drawer, forget about it. It's not worth doing at all. We got to find a way to embed it in a way that, adds real value to someone's life, because I think that's where this becomes really powerful, and that's where I get a lot of energy. I had a team member who said to me, he was, really focused on, a lot of leadership stuff, but he actually said to me, hey, Zach, I just want to let you know that from your program, I learned something about myself. And he goes, and it's not really business related at all. I said, okay, what was that? He said, there is no one that can push my buttons greater than my son. He just finds a way to just, push my buttons like you would not believe. And maybe in the past, I would have responded with, anger and frustration because I just didn't get it. He goes, but now I do. I get my son now. The things that are frustrating me are the source of his greatest talent and where he's going to be successful in the future. And I've just got a different mindset and a totally different relationship with my son. And so I think from that story, and how I'd like to wrap up is around the impact that we can have transcends business results, people at work, but our organizations are powerful places because they're where people spend so much time in their lives. And if we can help them in that place, add value to them personally, we can change the communities that we live in and the world we live in. I think that's a tremendous thing.
Fantastic, Zac, and for those that are listening, if you want more of Zac, he's going to be speaking at the Strength Summit in Omaha in a month's time or so. So enjoy your first trip to Gallup HQ and enjoy your summit experience, Zac. And thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Zac, make sure you track me down while you're here in Omaha.
I will.
This summer. It'd be good to see you. Hopefully, I'll have a little bit better of a voice when we get there. Thanks again, Zac. You guys hang on for just 1 second. We'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strength Center. Just gallupstrengthcenter.com. Send us your questions or comments if you'd like to be a guest blogger. We've got spaces reserved for that on our coaches blog. Send us an email with kind of your ideas, what you're kind of thinking about. Put guest blogger in the subject line. Send that to coaching@gallup.com. We'd love to consider it. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program as well as all the ones we've done. We've done a bunch of them. They're available for you. They're on our social. They're on our coaches blog. Go to coaching.gallup.com. And mentioned a Gallup certified strengths coach. If you're interested in more information about how to become one of those, you can head out to our courses page, courses.gallup.com, and mention the summit, July 16th, 17th, and 18th of 2018. If it's past that, we probably still are doing it. You can head over to the CliftonStrengthsSummit.com. And anything, by the way, 15% discount on courses at the summit. But Ann, do you guys have any training going on there in Australia you want to talk about?
We do. We have a course coming up on public SSC in June 18th and 19th, or 19th and 20th, one of the two, the first and only for this year. And if you happen to be watching this, close to this production date, we're having a healthcare briefing, which is going to be really great on June 12th here in the Sydney office, which anybody out there in that space should feel free to come by.
Yeah, one of the things I never say, but if you follow Gallup on LinkedIn, you get all this information as well. So if you want to do that, we're often posting on LinkedIn, and that's a great way to keep up with us. Just follow Gallup on LinkedIn, a great way to do it. You can also join us on our Facebook page. Go to facebook.com/groups/called2coach. About 11,000 of us out there talking about this stuff all the time. If you want to join us there, and many of you have, appreciate you doing that. I want to thank you for joining us today. We'll look forward to the next Call to Coach. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.